The table was perfect, crystal glasses catching the light, golden pine cones nestled among evergreen boughs, napkins folded into delicate swans. 7 years I'd spent perfecting these performances, dimming myself to make him shine. So when Thatcher slid those divorce papers across our Christmas dinner table, his best friend smirking beside him, they expected tears. Devastation. The satisfying collapse of a woman ambushed. What they didn't expect was for me to smile, to reach into my purse for a small gold box containing evidence of everything they'd tried to hide. They never understood that the women they underestimate are the most dangerous of all. They wanted to break me in front of everyone I loved? Fine. But first, I would show them exactly who they'd been sleeping beside all these years. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today, and if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed. The pine-scented candles flickered against the burgundy walls of our dining room as I placed the last golden pinecone centerpiece on the table. Everything was perfect, hand-folded napkins arranged in delicate fan shapes, crystal glasses that caught the light in prismatic rainbows, and a 12-foot fir tree that dominated the corner of the room, dripping with ornaments I'd collected over the years. Perfect, I whispered to myself, stepping back to admire my work. The Corwin family Christmas dinner had to be flawless. It always was. I'd made sure of that for the past 7 years of my marriage to Thatcher. I smoothed down my emerald silk dress, checking my reflection in the antique mirror that hung in our entryway. Blythe Corwin, the picture of holiday elegance. My chestnut hair swept into a low chignon, pearl earrings catching the light. I practiced my smile, the one that showed just enough teeth to be warm but not enough to seem overeager. The perfect hostess smile. The perfect wife smile. The heavy front door opened behind me, and a gust of December air swept in along with my husband. Thatcher Corwin stomped snow from his Italian leather shoes and unwound his cashmere scarf, barely glancing my way. "It's starting to snow harder," he said, hanging his coat on the rack. "My parents might be late." At 42, Thatcher still had the athletic build from his college rowing days, his dark blonde hair showing distinguished touches of silver at the temples. When we'd met, I'd been captivated by his confidence, his easy charm. Now I recognized it for what it was, a performance, much like the one I'd be giving tonight. He finally looked at me, his blue eyes scanning the room before landing on the dining table. His lips thinned. "Too gold, Blythe. It's gaudy." He picked up one of the pine cones I'd spent hours hand-painting. "This isn't a department store window." I kept my smile fixed, even as my stomach tightened. "Your mother always compliments the gold theme. Because she's being polite." He set the pine cone down slightly off-center from where I'd placed it. A small act of control. "Did you chill the champagne I brought home yesterday? Ronan prefers Veuve Clicquot." "Of course," I said, already moving toward the kitchen. "It's been chilling since morning. And make sure we use the Waterford crystal flutes, not those modern ones you bought." I nodded, swallowing the correction that the modern ones were actually baccarat, a gift from his parents 3 Christmases ago. The doorbell rang just as I finished arranging the cheese board. "I'll get it," Thatcher called out, his voice instantly transforming into the warm, charismatic tone he used for everyone except me. "Ronan," I heard him exclaim. "Early as usual, you bastard." I took a deep breath and plastered on my smile before walking back into the foyer. Ronan Vale stood there, all 6 feet of him radiating the particular brand of confidence that came from old money and older connections. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his green eyes bright with mischief as they landed on me. "Blythe," he said, stepping forward to kiss my cheek. Ravishing as always. His cologne was too strong, overwhelming the scent of my carefully selected pine and cinnamon. "Ronan," I greeted, accepting his kiss with practiced grace. "So glad you could make it." "Wouldn't miss it for the world," he replied, a smile playing at his lips that didn't quite reach his eyes. He handed me a bottle of wine, something red and undoubtedly expensive. "A little something to complement whatever culinary masterpiece you've prepared." "How thoughtful." I accepted the bottle, noting the vintage. "I'll open this to breathe." As I turned to leave, I caught the subtle wink he gave me, as if I was in on some private joke. The familiar knot of unease tightened in my stomach. I moved to the kitchen, where I placed the wine on the counter and gripped the edge of the marble, letting my smile fall away for just a moment. My fingers trembled slightly. I knew, weeks ago, and I let them plan it. The text message thread I discovered on Thatcher's phone while he showered had told me everything I needed to know. The screenshots saved to my secure email account burned in my memory. Ronan, ready for some Christmas chaos? Thatcher, it's perfect timing. Everyone there to witness. Ronan, can't wait to watch her break. Betting she cries before pie. Thatcher, she'll probably just sit there frozen. Either way, it's done after tonight. I'd read those messages, felt my world tilt, then made my decision. They wanted a show? I'd give them one they'd never forget. The doorbell rang again, pulling me from my thoughts. I straightened my spine, checked my lipstick in the reflection of a serving spoon, and walked back out. Thatcher's parents, William and Eleanor Corwin, entered with the particular stiffness of people who believed warmth was a weakness. William immediately handed me his coat without looking at me, his attention on his son. Eleanor air-kissed both my cheeks, her critical gaze sweeping over my dress. Green this year, Blythe? Bold choice. Festive, I replied with a smile that didn't falter. Eleanor Corwin had never approved of me. I wasn't from the right family, didn't attend the right schools. Even after 7 years, I remained Thatcher's choice rather than a true Corwin in her eyes. Something smells divine, William said, finally acknowledging my existence. Roast duck with cherry glaze, I replied. Thatcher's favorite. The doorbell rang one final time, and I felt a genuine smile cross my face for the first time that evening. I opened the door to find my cousin Eevee Harper stomping snow from her boots, her bright red hair escaping from under a knit beanie. Sorry I'm late, she said, pulling me into a hug that smelled of cold air and vanilla. Traffic was a nightmare, and then I had to park 3 blocks away because some jerk in a BMW took up 2 spaces. Probably Ronan, I whispered, and we both laughed. Eevee pulled back and studied my face. At 31, she was 4 years younger than me, but had always been the wiser one. You okay? She murmured. Perfect, I lied, squeezing her hand. Eevee was the closest thing to family I had since my parents died, but even she didn't know what I'd discovered. What I had planned. Dinner progressed with the practiced rhythm of a theatrical production. I served the appetizers, seared scallops with brown butter, while Thatcher poured wine and charmed the table with stories from his law firm. I smiled and nodded at all the right moments, playing my part flawlessly. But inside I felt hollow, like a marionette, elegant, poised, empty, going through the motions while someone else pulled the strings. For years, I'd performed this role, the supportive wife who'd given up her own career in art restoration to be the perfect hostess, the perfect partner to a man whose ambition consumed everything around him. During the main course, I noticed Ronan lean over to whisper something to Thatcher. They both chuckled, glancing my way before quickly looking back at their plates. I pretended not to notice, taking a slow sip of my wine instead. So, Blythe, Ronan said, cutting into his duck with surgical precision, Thatcher tells me you're thinking of reopening that little art studio of yours? I could feel Thatcher stiffen beside me. We'd argued about this last week. My desire to return to work, his insistence that it would reflect poorly on him if his wife needed to work. Just considering my options, I replied evenly. I've always found that emotional women and business don't mix well, Ronan continued, swirling his wine. Had a client last month, female CEO of a tech startup. Absolute disaster when the pressure hit. Tears in the boardroom.
He shook his head.
Couldn't handle it when things got tough. Perhaps she was reacting to difficult people, not difficult circumstances, I replied, maintaining my smile. Thatcher laughed thinly. Blythe fancies herself quite the feminist these days. I fancy myself quite human, I corrected, still smiling. The table had become a chessboard, each comment a move in a game where I already knew the final play. In my purse, tucked just behind my chair, was a small gold box. Inside it was everything I needed, all carefully prepared, all perfectly timed. Because timing is everything. As I cleared the dinner plates and brought out the dessert, a chocolate yolog dusted with powdered sugar, I felt an almost eerie calm settle over me. 7 years of marriage, of dimming myself to shine a light on Thatcher, of ignoring the subtle humiliations and not-so-subtle control. All of it had led to this moment. The room dimmed as Thatcher asked William to turn down the overhead lights for ambience. I watched as my husband straightened in his chair, cleared his throat, and reached for an envelope I knew had been hidden in his jacket pocket all evening. "Before dessert," he announced, his voice carrying that practiced courtroom authority, "I have something to share." He slid the thick manila envelope across the polished mahogany table, directly toward me. "Merry Christmas, Blythe." The envelope stopped just short of my dessert plate, its cream-colored surface stark against the dark wood. For a moment, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. I could feel the weight of every gaze, Eleanor's tight-lipped anticipation, William's feigned confusion, Eevee's genuine concern, Ronan's barely concealed smirk. Time slowed. I became acutely aware of everything around me, the soft linen napkin between my fingers, the gentle ticking of the antique grandfather clock in the corner, the subtle shake in my wineglass as someone's knee bumped the table. "Open it," Thatcher urged, his voice carrying that false concern he'd perfected for client meetings. "It's important." I looked up, meeting his eyes. For 7 years, I'd searched those blue depths for the man I thought I'd married. Now I saw only calculation and cold detachment. Whatever warmth had existed had long been replaced by ambition and disdain. With steady hands, I reached for the envelope. The paper was expensive, thick and textured. I could feel the substantial weight of the documents inside before I even broke the seal. "What is this?" Eevee asked, her voice cutting through the tension. Before Thatcher could answer, Ronan laughed, a sharp, cruel sound that shattered any pretense of civility. "Told you she'd cry before pie," he said, raising his glass like it was a toast. But there were no tears in my eyes as I pulled out the documents and scanned the first page. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Irreconcilable differences. I recognized our lawyer's letterhead. Apparently, Thatcher had used the family attorney we both employed. Another small humiliation. Instead of the shock and breakdown they clearly expected, I reached for the Mont Blanc pen Thatcher always kept in his breast pocket. He was so surprised by my calm that he handed it to me automatically. "You're right," I said, uncapping the pen. "This is important." The scratch of the pen against paper was the only sound in the room as I signed my name on the indicated lines, flipping through each page methodically. When I finished, I capped the pen, placed the documents back in their envelope, and slid them back toward Thatcher. "There," I said. "All done." Thatcher's face flickered with confusion. This wasn't the reaction he'd planned for. Beside him, Ronan's smug expression had faltered. "Blythe, dear," Eleanor began, her voice tight with embarrassment, "perhaps you don't understand." "I understand perfectly," I interrupted, reaching for my purse behind me. "Thatcher wants a divorce. And now he is one." I pulled out the small gold box I'd prepared, wrapped in the same gold paper as the Christmas gifts under our tree, and placed it carefully between Thatcher and Ronan. "This one's for both of you." The confusion around the table was palpable. William's face had turned an alarming shade of red, whether from anger or embarrassment, I couldn't tell. Thatcher's sister Margot, who had remained silent throughout the dinner, muttered, "What's going on?" Eleanor looked like she'd swallowed something sour. Only Eevee seemed to be catching up, her eyes widening as she looked between me and the gold box. "What is this?" Thatcher demanded, making no move to touch the gift. "Open it," I echoed his earlier words. "It's important." After a moment's hesitation, Ronan reached for the box, his curiosity overcoming his caution. With a glance at Thatcher, he pulled off the gold wrapping paper and lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of tissue paper, were 3 items: a USB drive, a printed photograph, and a folded legal document. The effect was immediate and electric. Both men's faces drained of color as they recognized what they were seeing. The photograph showed Thatcher and Ronan at the Westlake Hotel 3 weeks earlier, not in the restaurant or lobby, but entering a specific room. The date and timestamp were clearly visible in the corner. "Where did you get this?" Ronan stammered, his usual eloquence deserting him. I smiled, taking a sip of my wine. "You gave it to me. You just didn't know you were being watched." 3 weeks earlier, I had followed Thatcher after he'd claimed to be meeting clients for dinner. What I discovered at that hotel had shattered any remaining illusions about my marriage. But instead of confronting him immediately, I'd made a different choice.
Eevee batsha. Eevee listanat.
I'd gathered evidence. And I'd planned. "This is ridiculous," Thatcher said, attempting to regain control of the situation. "Blythe is clearly having some kind of breakdown. The USB contains a recording," I continued calmly, "of both of you discussing not just this divorce ambush, but several other things I think the partners at your firm would find fascinating." I turned to Ronan, especially the comments about Judge Winslow and how easily she can be influenced. Ronan shot to his feet, his chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. "This is blackmail."
No. Incorrecta.
"This is evidence. The difference matters in court, as you both know." The third item, the legal document, remained unmentioned, but I could see Thatcher eyeing it warily. "I think it's time for us to go," Ronan said to Thatcher, abandoning any pretense that this evening could be salvaged. "Yes, I think that would be best," I agreed, still seated calmly. "Take your gift with you. Consider it an early Christmas present." As Ronan stormed out, Thatcher remained seated, clearly trying to formulate some way to save face in front of his family. The room had gone ice-cold despite the crackling fire in the hearth. "I don't know what game you think you're playing," he began. "No games," I interrupted. "Just truth. Isn't that what you wanted tonight? To expose the truth about our marriage." I lifted my wine glass. To predictable women. The remainder of Christmas night unraveled like a sweater caught on a nail. After Ronan's dramatic exit, Thatcher's parents demanded explanations that neither of us was willing to give in full. Eleanor, despite her obvious shock at the divorce papers, somehow still found a way to make it seem like my fault. "You never did understand the pressures Thatcher faces," she said, gathering her coat. "Marriage requires sacrifice, Blythe. My generation understood that." "You're right, Eleanor," I replied, helping her with her wrap. "Some sacrifices are necessary. Self-respect shouldn't be one of them." William, uncharacteristically, had nothing to say. He shook his son's hand with a stiffness that suggested disappointment, nodded curtly at me, and followed his wife out into the snowy night. Margot hesitated at the door, looking back at me with an unreadable expression before following her parents. There had always been something in her eyes when we spoke, a recognition, perhaps, of what it meant to exist in the Corwin orbit without being fully accepted. As the door closed behind them, Thatcher rounded on me, his carefully maintained facade cracking. "You've lost your mind," he spat. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" "Exactly what you forced me to do," I replied, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. "You wanted to humiliate me in front of everyone. Instead, you exposed yourself." "Those recordings won't hold up," he said, lowering his voice. "And if you try to use them, You'll what?" I interrupted.
Sueme?
"We're already getting divorced. Ruin me socially? You were already planning that." "No, Thatcher, I think you'll find there's very little left you can threaten me with." Eevee, who had remained silently supportive throughout the confrontation, stepped between us. "I think you should leave, Thatcher."
Now.
He looked at her as if seeing her for the first time, then back at me. Something dangerous flickered in his eyes before he grabbed his coat. "This isn't over," he said, yanking open the front door. "Yes," I replied. "It is." After he left, Eevee and I stood in the silence of a house that no longer felt like home. The Christmas tree lights blinked merrily, oblivious to the destruction of the evening. "Holy shit, Blythe," Eevee finally said. "What was on that USB?" I sank onto the sofa, suddenly exhausted. "Everything. Them planning tonight. Them discussing how to ensure I get nothing in the divorce. Ronan advising Thatcher on how to hide assets." I looked up at her. "And other things. Things that could end both their careers if the wrong people heard them." Eevee sat beside me, taking my hand. How long have you known? About the divorce? 3 weeks. About the kind of man I married? Probably years, but I didn't want to see it. I squeezed her hand. I kept thinking if I was perfect enough, accommodating enough, he'd become the man I thought I married. Stupid, right? Not stupid, Eevee said fiercely. Human, but blithe. Her eyes searched mine. What now? I took a deep breath. Now we wait. Because by morning, things are going to get very interesting. I was right. By 9 a.m. the next day, my phone was buzzing constantly with notifications. Overnight, selected portions of the recordings had mysteriously appeared on several social media accounts, anonymous accounts that couldn't be traced back to me. The hashtag #ThatcherCorwinExposed was trending locally. The clips were damning. Thatcher and Ronan mockingly imitating female colleagues, discussing how to manipulate certain judges, plotting my public humiliation, and making crude comments about several prominent women in their professional circles. By noon, Thatcher had called me 17 times. I let each call go to voicemail. You need to hear this, Eevee said, holding out her phone while I made coffee in my small apartment kitchen. I'd moved out that morning, taking only essentials, leaving Thatcher with his perfect house and imperfect secrets. I leaned in to listen to a podcast interview Thatcher had apparently given just hours after the story broke, attempting damage control. My wife has clearly orchestrated this entire situation. His voice came through, smooth and reasonable as always. She set me up, recorded private conversations illegally, and is now attempting to ruin my career because she's emotionally unstable. The host, to her credit, pushed back. But Mr. Corwin, in the recordings you clearly discuss planning to serve your wife divorce papers at Christmas dinner in front of family and friends, calling it, and I quote, the perfect public humiliation. How do you explain that? There was a pause, and I could almost see Thatcher's forced smile. Conversations taken out of context can be misleading. My wife has manipulated the situation. Actually, the host interrupted, we have the full 30-minute recording, not just the clips that appeared on social media. Would you like me to play more of it? The interview deteriorated from there, with Thatcher eventually cutting it short, claiming he had pressing client matters to attend to. By the afternoon of December 26th, the story had expanded beyond local interest. A women's legal advocacy group had picked up the story, particularly focusing on the comments about Judge Winslow. By evening, Ronan's law firm had issued a terse statement that he had been placed on administrative leave pending an internal investigation. You didn't just get even, Eevee said, scrolling through the coverage on her tablet. You scorched the earth. I didn't leak the recordings, I said, which was technically true. I hadn't done it personally. Eevee gave me a knowing look but didn't press. Instead, she showed me an email that had just arrived in my inbox from Caroline Walsh, the executive director of Women in Law, a prominent advocacy network. They want to meet with you, she said. They're impressed by your composure and think your story could help other women recognize the signs of emotional manipulation. I stared at the email, feeling a strange mix of vindication and vertigo. For years, I'd been Thatcher's wife, defining myself through his needs and expectations. The idea of being just blithe, of having my own voice, my own platform, was both exhilarating and terrifying. That night, after Eevee left, the apartment fell silent. Too silent. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the wall, and something unexpected happened. I broke down. Not because I missed Thatcher or regretted my actions, but because of the years of emotional isolation I'd endured. The constant criticism disguised as helpful suggestions. The gradual erosion of my confidence. The slow disappearance of the woman I'd once been. The tears came in waves, deep and cleansing, until I felt empty but somehow lighter. When they finally stopped, I picked up my phone and saw a text from an unknown number. I've always seen who you really are, even when you couldn't. I'm here when you're ready.
Eevee.
The next morning brought more developments. Paparazzi photos emerged of Thatcher leaving a downtown restaurant with a young model. Apparently, his client meeting had been a date. His carefully crafted image as a devoted family man was crumbling by the hour. More surprisingly, I received a call from my estranged father, Robert Anderson. We hadn't spoken in almost 5 years, not since a bitter argument about my marriage to Thatcher. He'd seen what I refused to see. "I saw you on the news," he said, his gruff voice softened with concern. "You okay, Blithy?" The childhood nickname broke something open in my chest. "I'm getting there, Dad." "You need anything?"
Money?
"A place to stay." "I'm okay for now," I said, surprised by how good it felt to hear his voice. "But maybe we could have lunch sometime?" "I'd like that," he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "I'd like that a lot." That evening, I opened my laptop and created a new document. At the top, I typed the words "signed unbroken" and began to write. Not for publication, not for revenge, but for myself. To reclaim my story, one painful, liberating word at a time. As I wrote, my phone buzzed with a notification. Another news alert. Attorney Ronan Vale suspended indefinitely following ethics investigation. I smiled and kept writing. January arrived with bitter winds and unexpected revelations. The quiet aftermath of the holiday scandal had settled into a tentative new normal. I'd been staying in my apartment for just over a week, rebuilding my life one small decision at a time. My reconnection with my father was slow, but healing. Our first lunch together had been awkward but honest. Years of unspoken hurts finally addressed over soup and sandwiches at the corner deli he'd always loved. "I should have fought harder to make you see what kind of man he was," Dad said, his weathered hands wrapped around his coffee mug. "I wouldn't have listened," I admitted. "I needed to see it for myself." As we parted with a hug that felt like coming home, I realized how much I'd sacrificed to fit into Thatcher's world. Not just my career, but my family, my sense of self. That afternoon, I was reviewing my bank statements, taking stock of my financial situation now that I was on my own, when I noticed something odd. A joint investment account that should have contained nearly $200,000 showed a zero balance. The transfer had occurred 3 weeks before Christmas, right around the time I'd discovered Thatcher's plans. My heart raced as I dug deeper, pulling up every financial statement I could access. More discrepancies emerged, accounts I didn't recognize, transfers to entities with generic names like TCR Holdings and Westlake Management. I called Eevee immediately. "I think Thatcher's been hiding money," I said when she answered. "Maybe for months." "That snake," she muttered. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know. I don't even know how deep this goes or how to trace it all." There was a pause on the line. "Actually," Eevee said slowly, "I might be able to help with that. Remember my ex, James? He works in digital forensic accounting now. He owes me a favor." 2 days later, Eevee arrived at my apartment with her laptop and a determined expression. James gave me some specialized software and a crash course in following digital money trails. "Let's go hunting." We spent hours huddled over spreadsheets and banking portals. Eevee's IT skills proved invaluable as she methodically tracked transaction patterns. "Look at this," she said sometime after midnight, pointing to her screen. "See these transfers? They all go through the same shell company before disappearing offshore. And guess who's listed as the registration agent for that shell company?" "Ronan," I guessed. "Bingo." She pulled up the corporate registration. Vale International Consulting. Registered in Delaware 3 years ago. 3 years. I repeated, stunned. They've been planning this for 3 years? Maybe not the divorce specifically, Eevee reasoned, but they've definitely been moving money around for a while. And look at the timing of these larger transfers. They all happen right after you sign those investment authorizations Thatcher asked you to sign. I remembered those documents, thick stacks of financial papers Thatcher would present to me, explaining them as standard portfolio rebalancing or tax optimization strategies. I'd sign them without questioning, trusting that my husband was handling our finances responsibly. But why? I asked. Thatcher's family is wealthy. His practice is successful. Why hide money from me? Maybe it's not just about the divorce, Eevee suggested, opening another file. Look at this. I found a lawsuit thread against Thatcher's firm from last summer. Something about misappropriation of client funds. It never went to court, but if it had, any assets in his name might have been at risk. I finished, the pieces falling into place. So he moved them where they couldn't be touched, and made sure they wouldn't be part of our marital assets either. 2 birds, 1 stone, Eevee nodded. The next morning, I received an email from our family attorney, Gregory Williams. Attached was a digital copy of our prenuptial agreement, with an addendum I'd never seen before. What the hell is this? I demanded when I called his office. The updated clause you and Thatcher signed last spring, Gregory replied, sounding confused. It stipulates that in the event of divorce, your claim to family inheritance funds would be voided. Don't you remember signing it? I never signed this, I said firmly, staring at the document. The signature looked like mine, but I had no memory of ever seeing this addendum. Blythe, Gregory sighed. I was there. You both came to my office. You signed it in front of me. A cold realization washed over me. Last April, Thatcher had asked me to stop by Gregory's office to update some estate planning documents. I'd signed several papers while Thatcher and Gregory discussed golf. I hadn't read them carefully. Why would I need to, when our trusted family attorney was handling things? I need to get my own lawyer, I said, ending the call. Finding Hollis Ray was either the greatest stroke of luck or divine intervention. Recommended by a women's legal support group, Hollis specialized in high-conflict divorces and had a reputation for being meticulous and relentless. When I walked into her downtown office, I was struck by her composed confidence. In her mid-40s, with silver-streaked dark hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail and sharp gray eyes that missed nothing, she radiated competence. So, she said after I'd explained my situation, your husband and his friend planned to humiliate you with divorce papers at Christmas dinner, but you turned the tables on them with evidence of their scheming, which has now gone public. She leaned back in her chair. And now you've discovered financial irregularities, suggesting they've been hiding assets and potentially forging your signature on legal documents. That's the short version, yes. A smile, sharp and satisfied, crossed her face. Mrs. Corwin, I would be delighted to represent you. It's Ms. Anderson now. I corrected, reclaiming my maiden name. Or just Blythe. Blythe, then. She nodded. Let me tell you why I'm particularly motivated to take your case. 6 years ago, Ronan Vale represented my ex-husband in our divorce. He used every dirty trick in the book, including some that bordered on ethics violations too subtle to prove. Her eyes gleamed. I've been waiting for a chance to face him in court again. Over the next week, Hollis built our case with surgical precision. We filed for an emergency injunction to freeze all marital assets, requested a forensic accounting investigation, and prepared to challenge the suspicious prenup addendum. Thatcher was served with our countersuit papers on the steps of his law firm, with photographers conveniently present to capture his shocked expression. The humiliation he'd planned for me at Christmas was now being returned tenfold. Meanwhile, I focused on rebuilding. The meeting with women in law had gone well, leading to an invitation to speak at a conference on emotional abuse and financial control in marriages. My blog, though still private, had become a vital outlet for processing my experiences. Then came the unexpected ally. One evening, as I was leaving a coffee shop after meeting with Hollis, a familiar voice called my name. Margot Corwin stood on the sidewalk, bundled against the January cold, looking uncertain. "Do you have a minute?" she asked. We settled at a corner table, steam rising from fresh coffees between us. "I want you to know," she said carefully, "that I've always admired you. The way you handled Thatcher, my parents." She stared into her cup. "The Corwin family isn't easy to navigate." "No," I agreed. "It isn't. I'm not surprised about what Thatcher did," she continued. "He's always been entitled, always gotten his way. But the financial stuff," she looked up at me, "that's new. And it involves more than just you." My pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" "There have been rumors at the firm. Client money moving through unusual channels. Dad's been asking questions that Thatcher keeps dodging." She pulled a folded paper from her purse and slid it across the table. "This is a list of accounts I've heard mentioned. I don't know if it helps, but..." I took the paper, our fingers briefly touching. "Why are you doing this?" Because I've spent my whole life watching my family crush people who don't fit their mold. And for once, I'd like to be on the right side. As Margot left, my phone chimed with a notification. An email from an anonymous account contained a single audio file. The sender's message was brief. Thought you should hear this. Not everyone is who they seem. I pressed play and Ronan's voice filled my earbuds. Thatcher's an idiot. He actually thinks we're in this together. Once we get control of the Madison account, I'll have enough leverage to force a partnership vote. By next year, it'll be Vail and Associates, and he'll be lucky if I let him keep an office. I smiled, forwarding the file to Hollis. The cracks in their alliance were starting to show. The courtroom was unnaturally quiet as I walked in, my footsteps echoing against marble floors. I'd chosen a black suit, not for mourning but for power. No softness today, no compromise. Hollis walked beside me, case files tucked under her arm, her expression coolly professional. Across the aisle, Thatcher and Ronan sat with their legal team. They both looked diminished somehow. Thatcher's usual polished appearance slightly rumpled, Ronan missing his trademark smirk. When our eyes met, Thatcher quickly looked away. All rise, called the bailiff as Judge Catherine Emerson entered. At 63, Judge Emerson had a reputation for zero tolerance for legal games. Her silver hair was cut in a no-nonsense bob, her dark eyes sharp behind rimless glasses as she surveyed the courtroom. Before we begin, she said once everyone was seated, I want to make something clear. I'm aware this case has generated significant media attention. I'm also aware there have been recordings and social media elements involved. Her gaze swept over all of us. This courtroom is not a venue for public spectacle or revenge. We will stick to facts, evidence, and law. Is that understood? Both legal teams nodded their agreement. Excellent, she said. Ms. Ray, your emergency petition regarding marital assets is first on our agenda. Please proceed. Hollis rose, buttoning her jacket. Your Honor, we have evidence indicating systematic concealment of marital assets beginning approximately 3 years ago. What followed was a masterclass in legal precision. Hollis walked through our evidence methodically, the suspicious transfers, the shell companies, the conveniently timed addendum to our prenup. She presented financial statements, corporate registrations, and expert analyses from the forensic accountant she'd engaged. Thatcher's attorney, a senior partner from his firm named Lawrence Bennett, tried to portray the financial movements as normal portfolio management, but his arguments felt hollow against the weight of our evidence. Furthermore, Your Honor, Hollis continued, we have reason to believe Mrs. Corwin's signature was forged on several key documents, including the prenuptial amendment dated April of last year. Judge Emerson frowned. That's a serious allegation, Counselor. Yes, Your Honor, which is why we've engaged a handwriting expert. Hollis submitted another report. As you'll see, the expert has identified several inconsistencies between Mrs. Corwin's known signature and those appearing on these documents. By the time the morning session concluded, Judge Emerson had ordered a freeze on all identified accounts and authorized an expanded forensic investigation of all marital finances. During the lunch recess, Hollis and I huddled in a conference room. They're rattled, she observed, unwrapping her sandwich. Bennett asked for a 15-minute private conference with Thatcher and Ronan. Lots of tense faces and harsh whispers. Good, I said, though I took no joy in it. This wasn't about revenge anymore, it was about justice and truth. When court resumed for the afternoon session, there was a palpable shift in energy. Bennett approached Hollis for a whispered conversation before the judge returned. When Hollis came back to our table, her expression gave nothing away. They've offered a settlement, she murmured. Full financial disclosure, equitable division of all assets, including those moved offshore, and a non-disclosure agreement to keep the recordings private. And in return, we drop the forgery allegations and agree not to pursue criminal charges. I considered this, watching Thatcher across the room. He was staring at his hands, shoulders slumped. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. No, I decided. I don't want their money. I want the truth on record. Hollis smiled. A quick, fierce thing. That's what I told them you'd say. The afternoon brought a surprise witness, Margot Corwin, called by our side. As she took the stand, Thatcher visibly stiffened. "Ms. Corwin," Hollis began, "what is your current position at Corwin, Bennett and Associates?" "I'm the compliance officer," Margot replied, her voice steady despite her brother's glare. "And in that capacity, have you observed any financial irregularities involving your brother or Mr. Vale?" Margot took a deep breath.
Yes.
"Over the past 2 years, I've noted several client trust accounts with unusual transfer patterns. When I raised concerns, I was told by both my brother and Mr. Vale that these were special arrangements approved by the senior partners." "Were they?"
No.
"When I eventually took my concerns to my father, he had no knowledge of these arrangements." The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Judge Emerson gavelled for silence. "Ms. Corwin," Hollis continued, "are you aware of any connection between these professional irregularities and the financial maneuvers in your brother's personal accounts?" Objection. Bennett shot to his feet. Calls for speculation. Sustained, Judge Emerson ruled. Hollis nodded, undeterred. "Ms. Corwin, did your brother ever discuss his intentions regarding his marriage to Blythe Anderson?" Margot's eyes found mine briefly before she answered.
Yes.
"About 6 months ago, he told me he was planning to divorce Blythe but needed to get his affairs in order first. He said he'd been moving assets where they couldn't be touched and that Ronan was helping him create a clean break." The testimony continued, each revelation more damning than the last. When Ronan took the stand for cross-examination, Hollis was relentless, picking apart his evasions until his customary confidence crumbled. Then came the moment we'd prepared for. Hollis played the audio recording I'd received, Ronan betraying Thatcher, revealing their partnership was as false as my marriage had been. The courtroom fell silent as Ronan's voice echoed. "Thatcher's an idiot. By next year, it'll be Vale and Associates, and he'll be lucky if I let him keep an office." I watched Thatcher's face as the recording played, the shock, the hurt, the rage that flashed across his features. For the first time, he was experiencing what I had felt at that Christmas dinner, the public unraveling of trust. As the day's proceedings drew to a close, Judge Emerson addressed the court. "Based on the evidence presented today, I'm referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for review of potential criminal charges related to the financial disclosures. Additionally, I'm forwarding information to the State Bar Association regarding the ethical concerns raised about both Mr. Corwin and Mr. Vale's professional conduct." She turned her gaze directly to me. "Ms. Anderson, do you wish to make a statement before we adjourn?" I hadn't expected this opportunity. Rising slowly, I looked not at the judge, but at Thatcher. 7 years ago, I married a man I thought I knew. I compromised, diminished, and rewrote myself to fit his expectations. I signed papers without reading them because I trusted him. I defended him to my family because I believed in him. I lost myself trying to be what he wanted. My voice grew stronger with each word. But standing here today, I am not a victim. I am not broken. What happened between us wasn't love. It was control disguised as care, criticism masked as concern. The truth is painful, but living a lie is worse. I turned to Judge Emerson. I don't want revenge. I want recognition of what was done and the freedom to rebuild without the shadow of deception. The gallery erupted in spontaneous applause. Judge Emerson allowed it for a moment before gaveling for order. "This court will reconvene tomorrow at 9 a.m., she announced. "I expect both parties to be prepared for final arguments." As we gathered our papers, Hollis leaned close. "That wasn't just good for our case," she murmured. "That was necessary for you." Outside the courthouse, reporters clustered on the steps. Camera flashes popped as Thatcher and Ronan pushed through the crowd, faces grim, offering no comments. When I emerged with Hollis, the questions came rapid fire. "Ms. Anderson, how does it feel to expose your husband's schemes? Will you pursue criminal charges? Is it true you're writing a book about your experience?" Hollis stepped forward. "My client has made her statement in court. She has nothing further to add at this time." As we made our way to the car, a woman broke from the crowd and pressed a folded note into my hand before disappearing back into the throng. In the privacy of the car, I unfolded it. Your words today gave me the courage to leave my own Thatcher. Thank you for showing me what strength looks like. A stranger no longer afraid. Something shifted in my chest. The realization that this painful journey might serve a purpose beyond my own healing. The next morning, the courtroom was even more crowded. Word of yesterday's testimony had spread, drawing spectators and additional media. Judge Emerson's final ruling was comprehensive and decisive. She voided the fraudulent prenup addendum, ordered a complete accounting and equitable division of all marital assets, including those hidden offshore, and granted my petition to legally reclaim my maiden name. Most importantly, she had all evidence sealed for the pending criminal investigation, effectively putting Thatcher and Ronan's legal futures in serious jeopardy. As the gavel fell one final time, I felt a weight lift, not just the burden of the case, but of the marriage itself. Walking out into the January sunlight, I was no longer Blythe Corwin, the perfect wife. I was Blythe Anderson, authoring my own story. Spring arrived with a gentleness that felt like forgiveness. The harsh winter had retreated, leaving behind soft breezes and the promise of renewal. For months had passed since the courtroom confrontation, and life had taken unexpected turns. Eevee's transformation had been the most surprising and delightful development. Inspired by my blog, she had launched a podcast called Unbroken Voices, featuring stories of women who had reclaimed their lives after controlling relationships. What had started as a side project had quickly gained traction, catching the attention of a major production company. I still can't believe this is happening, she said as we sat in her new studio space, surrounded by professional recording equipment. Her red hair was now cut in a confident bob, her eyes bright with purpose. 3 months ago, I was doing IT consulting and hating every minute. Now I'm getting emails from women across the country. Because you gave them a platform, I said, admiring how the space reflected her personality. Vibrant, unapologetic, warm. You made them feel heard. I learned from the best. She squeezed my hand. Speaking of which, how's the book coming? The book deal had come unexpectedly. After my story gained national attention, a publisher had approached me about turning my private blog into a memoir. Wrapped in gold, The Price of Perfection was now in final edits, scheduled for release in the fall. It's terrifying, I admitted. Putting everything out there, knowing he'll read it. That's exactly why it matters, Eevee insisted. Every woman who's been made to feel small needs to hear this story. The mail had started arriving soon after the trial. First a trickle, then a flood. Letters from women across the country sharing their own stories of controlled lives and quiet resistance. I kept them in a wooden box, reading them whenever doubt crept in about my decision to go public with my experience. I read about you in the paper and recognized my own marriage. After 20 years of believing I was crazy, your story helped me see the truth. I left him yesterday. I'm scared but finally breathing. These letters became my touchstones, reminders that speaking truth had ripple effects far beyond my own healing. My speaking engagements had also grown from that first invitation from women in law. I now traveled regularly, giving talks on emotional resilience and financial independence to women's groups and legal associations. Each presentation was a step further from the woman who had once dimmed herself to make others comfortable. Summer brought another kind of healing, reconciliation with my father. We had progressed from awkward lunches to comfortable routines, gradually rebuilding what had been lost. I'm selling the house in Vermont, he told me one Sunday as we walked through the farmer's market. Too big for just me. Thought maybe you might want some of the furniture for your new place. The oak dining table, I said immediately. The one Mom loved. He smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling. She always said it was meant for family gatherings. Lots of noise and laughter. I'd like that, I said, realizing I meant it. The idea of hosting dinners again, real ones, with warmth and genuine connection, no longer felt like stepping back into a role. It felt like reclaiming a joy. As Christmas approached again, I found myself planning a dinner, not with the meticulous perfection of the previous year, but with a genuine desire to create a space of warmth. No golden pine cones or hand-painted ornaments, just candles, comfort food, and people who truly cared for each other. My new apartment, purchased with my portion of the divorce settlement, was modest but entirely mine. I'd furnished it thoughtfully, each piece chosen for comfort rather than impression. The oak table from my childhood home dominated the dining area, its surface bearing the honest marks of decades of family meals. The guest list was small but significant. Eevee, my father, two close friends from the speaking circuit, and Margot, whose brave testimony had helped seal the case against Thatcher and Ronan. She had since left her family's firm and joined a non-profit legal aid organization, finding her own path away from the Corwin legacy. The morning of the dinner, an unexpected visitor arrived. Hollis raced at my door, coffee cups in hand and a folder tucked under her arm. "I was in the neighborhood," she said, though we both knew that was unlikely. "Thought you might want to hear the news in person." Over coffee at my kitchen counter, she shared the developments. Thatcher and Ronan had both accepted plea deals on reduced charges related to financial improprieties. They would avoid jail time but would face significant fines, professional probation, and community service. "It's not the full measure of justice," Hollis acknowledged, "but their careers are effectively over. No firm will touch them after this. And the State Bar Association is still conducting its own investigation." I absorbed this information, surprised at my own reaction. There was no satisfaction, no sense of triumph, just a quiet relief that it was ending. "There's something else," Hollis continued, sliding the folder toward me. "I've been asked to speak at a legal advocacy event in D.C. next month. They're specifically interested in cases involving financial abuse in high-asset divorces." I thought. She paused, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "I thought you might consider joining the panel." "As your client example?" I asked. "As my co-presenter," she corrected. "Your perspective adds something mine can't, and you've become quite the compelling speaker." I studied her face, noticing for the first time the warmth in her gray eyes, the slight softness around her usually decisive mouth. Over the months of working together, our professional relationship had evolved into something more complex, a friendship built on mutual respect and shared purpose. "I'd like that," I said, feeling a flutter of something I hadn't experienced in years, the quiet excitement of genuine connection. That evening, as my guests gathered around the table, I felt a contentment that had nothing to do with perfect place settings or curated impressions. Eevee was regaling everyone with stories from her podcast, my father was deep in conversation with Margot about environmental law, and Hollis was helping me bring dishes from the kitchen, our movements falling into an easy rhythm. "This is lovely," Hollis murmured as we arranged the final plates. "Real." "That's the point," I replied. "No performances tonight." As dessert was served, a slightly lopsided chocolate cake that would have horrified Eleanor Corwin, Eevee clinked her glass for attention. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small package wrapped in simple brown paper. "For you," she said, sliding it across to me. "A little early for Christmas, but it felt right for night." I unwrapped it carefully. Inside was the original gold box I had used that fateful Christmas night, now transformed. Eevee had lined it with soft velvet and inset a small plaque on the inside lid. Engraved in elegant script were the words, "She remembered who she was, and it changed everything." "Oh, Eevee," I whispered, tears threatening. "You saved yourself," she said simply. "That's worth commemorating." 2 weeks later, I stood before a packed auditorium at the National Women's Legal Defense Summit. As I approached the podium, I carried none of the nervousness that had plagued my early speaking engagements. "My story begins with an ending," I started, looking out over the sea of attentive faces. "A Christmas dinner, divorce papers, and a small gold box that changed everything. But what I've come to understand is that sometimes the most valuable gift isn't what you give to others. It's what you survive, what you reclaim, what you build from the ashes of what was taken." I paused, feeling the weight of the journey that had brought me here. We talk about freedom as if it's something we're born with, something that simply exists. But for many of us, freedom is something we have to fight for, again and again. It's found in small moments of courage, signing your name, speaking your truth, walking away from golden cages. It's found in recognizing your own worth when others have tried to diminish it. From the corner of my eye, I could see Hollis watching from the side of the stage, her expression a mix of pride and something more personal. The most dangerous prisons are the ones we don't recognize, relationships that slowly close around us, voices that become our inner critics, compromises that turn into surrender. My journey from that Christmas dinner to this podium wasn't about revenge or even justice. It was about remembering who I was before I became someone else's definition. As I continued my speech, I felt completely present in a way I never had during my years of performative perfection. This was not Blythe Corwin, the curated wife. This was Blythe Anderson, authentic and unbroken. Later, as Hollis and I walked through the light snowfall to our hotel, she surprised me by taking my hand. The warmth of her fingers twined with mine felt like another kind of beginning. "Where to now?" she asked, and I knew she wasn't just talking about dinner plans. I looked up at the gentle cascade of snowflakes, each one unique, each one finding its own path to Earth. "Forward," I said simply. "Just forward." And for the first time in years, I was walking my own path, no longer curated, no longer watched, completely free. Have you ever smiled while signing divorce papers, knowing the knife you're about to twist? If this tale of calculated revenge against those who underestimate women resonated with you, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of quiet strength turning into unstoppable power.